We are looking at the conclusion of Jesus' first sermon that is in Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 through 27. And the passage in front of us is the first of three concluding warnings, which are really summons to action. We're going to be talking about false prophets today. And then next week we'll look at the insufficiency of the charismata. And then we'll close with looking at two builders, two foundations. And these warnings focus attention on the seriousness of the sermon's call to the righteousness of the kingdom. Let me go ahead and read Matthew 7, verses 15 through 20 with you. Beware of the false prophets, those who come to you looking like sheep, while within they are predatory wolves. You can recognize them by their deeds. One does not pick grapes from thorn bushes, does one? Or figs from thistles? Thus every good tree produces good fruit, but a decayed tree produces bad fruit. A good tree is not able to produce bad fruit, nor can a decayed tree produce good fruit. Every tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. Clearly, then, you can recognize the false prophets by their deeds. If we look at that passage, let me give you a quick outline of where we are going to be going. There begins in verse 15 a warning concerning the false prophets. In verse 16, how to recognize the false prophets. And then in verses 17 and 18, there's a basic principle: the good comes from good and bad comes from bad. First, Jesus states that positively, and then he's going to state that negatively. Then in verse 19, we come to the reality of judgment, and then there is a repetition in verse 20 of how the false prophets are going to be recognized. Now, I want to do two things this morning, following in a Pauline tradition, and that is I want to give you a little bit of theology. I want to give you an understanding of these scriptures, and then I want us to look at the application, because we could go through these scriptures and go, great, false prophets, understand that need to get a false prophet by, I recognize them by the way that they live. And we can go home, and now we've heard a great sermon. Okay. But I want to give you some very, very practical ways of looking at an individual's life and their fruit. Let me begin with where Jesus began: beware of the false prophets. Now, the designation false prophets does not need to be taken in a very narrow sense as referring to a particular group. Nobody knows exactly the group that Jesus was referring to. It could have been the Pharisees as a group. It could have been prophets. But yet prophets were not only those that foretold what was going to happen, prophets were also those that would teach the people of Israel. And so those prophets could be a group of teachers. They could be the Pharisees. They could be the prophets. Those who were prophesying could be a number of different groups. So they, again, when we talk about false prophets, and I'm going to expand this into leaders in a little while, they were teaching the people, they were leaders in the people, and it can be actually applied generically to everybody who fulfills the description that we find in verses 15 to 20. Everyone who is going to be giving bad fruit or producing bad fruit. Now, we find that we are to beware of the false prophets. And again, these are people who, on the surface, they appear to be something that they are not. It is of the essence of false prophets that they pretend to have something and proclaim the truth, but the evidence of their lives is something different than the proclamation of their mouth. In other words, they may say do this, but they do something quite differently. So beware of the false prophets, those who come to you looking like sheep, Wow, looking like sheep. In other words, some of your translations will say they come in sheep's clothing. They appear to be proper members of the people of God. They look like everybody else. Now, sheep is a common Old Testament metaphor for the people of God. In Psalm 78:52, the psalmist said, "But he led forth his own people like sheep," speaking of God, "and guided them in the wilderness as a flock." And again, a metaphor for the people of God in the Old Testament. Psalm 100, verse 3, David wrote, "Know that the Lord himself is God. It is he who has made us, not we ourselves. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture." In Matthew, of sheep is commonly applied to the church. Matthew 10:16, Jesus said, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves." And in Matthew 25:33, "And he will put the sheep on his right and the goats on the left," speaking of the judgment. And in Matthew 26:31, Jesus said to his disciples, "You will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered." So again, when we're talking about sheep, we're talking about the people of God. And these people, these false prophets, they come looking like sheep, but within it says they are predatory wolves. They are ravenous wolves. So despite their outward appearance, despite their profession, these persons are in fact the mortal enemies of the sheep. Sheep do not get along with wolves. How many of you know that sheep and wolves do not mix right now? Now, one day, even the lion will lie down with the lamb, and there will be peace between them, but that's not right now. If you put wolves among sheep, the wolves are not the one that are going to get trampled by the sheep. The sheep are the ones that are going to get eaten by the wolves. As the wolf is known for its ferocity, it is a natural enemy of the sheep. And so these deceivers are the natural enemies of the people of God. And the disciples of Jesus were to be wary. They were to be aware. They were to understand and identify those who were false, because following their way would only lead to the destruction of the flock. I found two illustrations of there are a lot of wolves in Israel during these days. And I found two illustrations where it said the elders proclaimed a fast in their cities upon this occasion because the wolves had devoured two little children beyond the Jordan. So the wolves had gotten two of the kids, some family. Another passage says, more than 300 sheep of the sons of Judah ben Shimei were torn by wolves. So, that probably was a very well-off family. If you've got 300 sheep that are being torn by wolves, that's quite a banquet for the wolves. That's not too good for the sheep. But there were many wolves out there. And when Jesus said you can recognize them by their deeds, that word recognize is the word to know. And there's a prefix added to that says you can fully know them. I mean, without any error, without any mistake, you can fully know these people. You can recognize them. So how are you supposed to recognize the false from the true? And you do that by their deeds. It's emphatic because of the position in the sentence. You will know them by their deeds. The fundamental concern here is with the conduct of the false prophets. It's not with the teaching of the false prophets. Now, yes, we have to discern the right teaching. But very often, people can come with the right teaching, but they can still be false prophets because it's a matter of their lives. It's not a matter simply of the teaching. So fruit. Fruit is a natural and common metaphor for righteous deeds in the scriptures. You can recognize them by some of your translations say fruit. Good fruit comes from what? Good trees. Bad fruit comes from bad trees. We had a tree in our backyard years ago when we lived in Florida, and it was an orange tree. And how many of you like oranges? You like oranges? Man, I love oranges. I love freshly squeezed orange juice. I love to eat oranges. But if you went to this tree and you picked one of the oranges, well, it was not sweet. In fact, ultimately, Twyla would make lemon pie out of those oranges. That was not good fruit. I don't know what happened to that tree, but somewhere along the way, it became a bad tree. And it had bad fruit, unless you were thinking it's a lemon tree. And then, oh, it was a good lemon tree, but it looked like an orange tree. So here's an orange tree that looks like an orange tree, but you could tell it wasn't an orange tree by its fruit, because as soon as you ate the fruit, it was lemons. Now it's interesting. It looked like an orange. It grew like an orange. It had the color of an orange. It had the outward texture of an orange. The tree looked like an orange tree. Everything about it on the outside said orange, 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 orange. But then when you picked it and you ate it, the fruit said, ugh, lemon, lemon, lemon. That's the greatest illustration of what Jesus is talking about. They look great on the outside, but the fruit, when you taste it, is not good. You shall know them by their fruits, not their doctrines, as many people would like to say. For the doctrine corresponds to the tree, but the practical effect of their teaching is the fruit of the tree. So verse 18 refers to the impossibility of the situation being otherwise than it is. In other words, one does not pick grapes from thorn bushes. You don't pick lemons from apple trees. The verse stresses that it is contrary to nature. A good tree is going to produce good fruit. A bad tree is going to produce bad fruit. James 3:12 says, "Can a fig tree, my brethren, produce olives?" Do you go to a fig tree and try to find olives? No. What do you find on a fig tree? Come on, what do you find on a fig tree? You don't know what you find on a fig tree. A figs. Yeah, one of you knows. What about an olive tree? What do you find on an olive tree? Hello? Olives. Yes. You're not too sure. This is not a trick question. Okay? Good fruit, good tree, bad fruit, bad tree. Neither can salt water produce fresh, James says. Every tree bears its own fruit. The good tree in the context of the sermon are the disciples of Jesus, and they're expected to bear good fruit, the righteousness of the kingdom. But a decayed tree is going to bear bad fruit. And these false prophets give the appearance of belonging to the truth, but when you eat the fruit, the character is revealed. It's spoiled. It's bad. Again, there are many scriptures, Jeremiah 24:8, Matthew 24:34 and 35, that talks about how a good tree will bear good fruit. Out of a good heart comes good things. Out of an evil heart comes evil things. Ephesians 4:29, let no unwholesome word, no rotten word, no decayed word. It's the same thing. If our heart is pure, then our mouth is going to speak that which is good, that which gives edification. And so this proverbial metaphor applied to the righteous and unrighteous says that there is an absolute essentiality of righteousness in the kingdom, and it's impossible that those who are not of the kingdom will produce it, but it is a certainty that those who are of the kingdom will produce it. When he says a good tree is not able to produce bad fruit, the heart determines the only proper interpreter of the actions of our life. So the means of detecting the false is the fruit. Are you getting that? It's the fruit. Now, let me give you one other example. I worked in banking for 5 years, and I must, through my hands, I did not have that, but through my hands passed literally millions of US dollars. I touched. I can't tell you how many millions upon millions of dollars. I was a vault teller for about a year, and in the vault we counted the vault every day, and every day we counted the vault, and there was at least $100,000 in the vault. What is that? That's what, 10 million shillings. So I'm counting the equivalent of 10 million shillings every day, and we would be going down the street. This is when it was safe to do this. I remember going to our cash vault to getting cash for our branch, and we're walking back, and the manager and I have a bag filled with money. We had probably 200,000 US dollars in this bag, and we were playing catch back and forth as we were walking. Now, those were the days that you did not have to worry about somebody coming up to you and bugging you and stealing your money, etc. No, it's not that old, okay? But those were those days. So again, I was literally, and then I was a teller, so I was taking in money all the time. So literally millions of dollars flowed through my hands. Now, I was in banking for 5 years like that, and I only accepted one counterfeit note the entire time. It was a $100 counterfeit U.S. bill. How come I accepted the one? Well, I was new, and I really hadn't been able to discern the false from the good. But once I accepted the one, I was able to determine the other. So there were means for detecting false currency. The first means was becoming intimately acquainted with the real. If you see enough real, when the false comes, you can spot it right away because you're so acquainted with the real. Now, some people say you need to study the false in order to understand the false. No, if you understand the real, then the false becomes very obvious. You see, as that paper would come, I could feel the difference in the paper. Back then, there were a lot of counterfeits, but the U.S. Treasury had a certain type of paper for the currency, and you could feel the difference. Okay, now ultimately, the counterfeiters got very good in terms of almost duplicating the paper, but there is a special kind of paper, and woven into the fabric of the bill were very tiny red threads. Now, I could look at it. I could just very quickly look at a bill, and I could see those red threads. Why? Because I was so used to the real. But a counterfeit did not have red threads. A counterfeit typically had no threads or had black threads. So right away, if you're looking and I'm seeing all this money flowing, and I know what it looks like. It's all got red, and well, there's something with a black thread. And I was able to catch a couple other counterfeits. But there's a counterfeit bill. Genuine bills were also nearly indestructible. I mean, you could go like this with a bill and would not tear. I mean, you couldn't really tear money like that because of how the fabric was. And bills were generally $100 denominations or below. Although, as in my years as a vault teller, I saw and had and counted $1,000 U.S. bills. $1,000 bill. One bill. It's $1,000. That would be 100,000 shillings in one bill. And we had a number of those, and we had a number of $500 bills. And I'll never forget, we had a $10,000 bill in our vault. Can you imagine a $10,000 bill? That was, what, a million shilling bill? Can you imagine that? Now, you won't find those in circulation in the U.S. because the U.S. Treasury has taken all those, and everything above 100, it's burned. But that bank was smart. It kept some of those and never put them back into circulation. Probably still has it to this day. But you see, you only counterfeit something that is valuable. Now, I've been out of banking for many years, and I understand that the counterfeiting process has gotten more subtle, more sophisticated, and the ways that I usually recognize probably would not work today. But if I were still in the banking industry, I would understand how to recognize a counterfeit. What is sad is that most of us as Christians don't know how to recognize a counterfeit. Possibly because we do not spend enough time with the real to come up with a counterfeit. So Jesus says you can recognize them by their fruit. There are ways of recognizing, and he said that ultimately they're going to be cut down and cast into the fire. And again, it implies that God is going to sort it all out at the end, and he's going to, God's the one that will cast them into the fire. And then he concludes by saying, clearly then you could recognize the false prophets by their deeds. Okay, so you can recognize the false prophets by their deeds, and my question would be, what are their deeds? You see, as the sermon draws closer to its conclusion, we are presented with a very stern warning against hypocrites, although that word is not used, that's what that false prophet is. They are people who appear to be and pretend to be what they are not. And so these false prophets, as they are called, can undermine the true flock of God because of what they look like. So the ultimate test of truth is not what these people say, but what they do. For what they do inescapably betrays their character and points to the judgment that awaits them. Again, it is inevitable that the followers of Jesus will do righteousness, and it is impossible for those who propose another way to do the righteousness. So the ultimate test, there's the bottom line, the ultimate test of truth is in deeds, not in what they claim, not in their pretensions. And as a church, the church must be ever vigilant against the appearance of empty words and pressed for the criterion of good works to discern the false from the real. Now, that's all a foundation, okay? Because at this point, I could send you home and you could go home and go, yes, okay, I'm not going to be deceived by the false, the false deeds, the false fruit. And I'm going to ask you, so, Jerry, what false fruit? Well, I don't know, but I'll taste it and I'll know it's false. Well, let me give you an understanding. I want to talk about false prophets in the terms of leaders. And I want to present to you 6 different kinds of leaders. And I want to suggest that each of these leaders are going to be leaders. They may be leaders in the church. They may be leaders in business. They may be leaders in your home. They may be leaders in government. But basically, unhealthy, toxic, false leaders who have bad fruit will be in all of those areas, and they typically fall into one of 6 categories. Now, typically they may not be all of one or all of the other, but they're going to have the majority of attributes of one over the other. So what I'd like you to do is this. I want to begin to help you to apply what Jesus said about beware of the false. And I want to talk to you about false leaders and how can you discern them by their fruit. So I want to talk about what I want to term a helpless infant, a terrible tyrant, a benevolent dictator, an abusive dictator, a competitive manipulator, and a competitive intimidator. And they're on your notes. So let's begin. Let's begin by looking at the helpless infant and the terrible tyrant, because there's a lot of overlap between those two. One is a very overt form of the other. One is very subtle. The other is very overt. One is hidden. One is obvious. So let's look at the purpose of both. Whether you're talking about a helpless infant as a leader or a terrible tyrant, the purpose of both is to make somebody else responsible for them. They don't want to take responsibility. They want somebody else to be responsible. So they will abdicate responsibility for what happens to them. You'll find that they are great at blame shifting. And they want to become dependent on making other people take care of them. That's why we're calling them a helpless infant and a terrible tyrant. They want somebody else to take care of them. So let's look at these. What's their strategy? Well, the helpless infant will manipulate you through guilt. And again, this is not a little child, this is a leader. But they're going to manipulate you through guilt. They're going to pretend to be helpless. They're going to pretend to have no ability, and we want you to do everything for us. And on the other side is a terrible tyrant, and they're going to intimidate through an emotional tantrum. And they use threats and they use insults to try to get you to take care of them. That's their strategy. Now, let's delve a little bit deeper into helpless infants. You see, a helpless infant is terrified of open conflict. They have an enormous need to please other people. They, even as leaders, they are people pleasers. They will choose the appearance of being a very nice person. If you look at a helpless infant and they're a leader, they come across to you as a very nice person. They are very dependent upon everybody around them. It may even appear like they're delegating, but not really. They're dependent. They hope to gain more power by guilting you. They want you they pretend to be helpless, so they will guilt you into doing something for them. And I have seen this in pastors who, they're waited on hand and foot by the congregation. And they seem to be so helpless, but they have guilted everybody into taking care of them. It's a useful way to please others, but get what you want at the same time. So these helpless infants will refuse responsibility for their own error. They use denial, it's not my fault. They will use blame shifting, it's somebody else's fault. Often there's a martyr-like acceptance of blame. Yes, okay, this was my fault, but it really wasn't. It was somebody else. They're going to seek peace, smooth any potential conflict. If there's a disagreement, they're going to tend to withdraw. They're going to tend to close down. They're going to tend to avoid any kind of conflict. And they're going to hide their anger, but they will punish you through passive-aggressive means. They're going to stay nice, but they'll get even. Again, you all have probably run into those kind of people, those kind of leaders, and have not known, oh my gosh, that's a helpless infant type of leader. You see, they operate from a hidden sense of superiority. On the surface, they appear nice, they appear cooperative, they appear complimentary, but internally they are judging you. And they are skillful in making you feel guilty. Why did you even let this problem exist? It's your fault for the problem being here. Now you've got to take care of the problem. Have you ever been blamed for a problem existing? It's all your fault. Well, again, a helpless infant often does that. They get others to take care of them by guilting them and saying, you've got to take care of me. Why aren't you taking care of me? And you've got to be guilty for even letting this problem occur. And of course, those helpless infants, they make it very risky to ever displease them. Because if you've ever met a helpless infant as a leader, and you've stood up or you've confronted or you've done anything, you're going to be seen as picking on a really nice guy. What is your problem? That's such a nice person. Why are you attacking them? And so you're going to be seen as a bully. as the one who's in the wrong, even though you're going to be confronting them, and you know what kind of leader they are, but they're going to just be helpless. Now that helplessness might be financial helplessness, it might be physical helplessness, it might be helplessness in terms of a job. It could be an emotional helplessness, but they're going to be helpless. And the bottom line is they want you to take care of them. And that's how they gain power. But on the other side of the helpless infants are the terrible tyrants. Now, a terrible tyrant is also going to use dependency as a control mechanism. They're going to manipulate you into taking on more than you can really take on. And they're going to say something like, if you take care of me, I'm going to reward you, I'm going to give you compliments, I'm going to make sure everybody knows how good you are, I'm going to tell others how wonderful you are. But let me talk to you about their telling behavior. They threaten to throw an emotional display of displeasure if they are not appeased. In other words, they manipulate through fear of emotional response. Let me give you a perfect example of this. How many of you have ever been in Naivas, Carrefour, any other grocery store, and you've seen a mother with a small child? And the small child is reaching for something. And the mother says, no, 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 you can't have that. And the child continues to reach for it. And no, you cannot have it. And she puts it back. And finally, that what does that child do? Well, that child stomps their foot, if they're old enough, and they sit down and they begin to cry, right? And what happens to the mother? Well, the mother is embarrassed. The mother, all of a sudden, she's embarrassed. But what's wrong with this mother that she's not taking care of her child and he's crying? There's got to be something wrong. And so to not be embarrassed, she's being manipulated by his tears or her tears. She's being manipulated to give what they are demanding. And finally, to quiet them, here, yes, you can have this. And so what has she just taught the child? That you can manipulate through the fear of an emotional response. You see, a fear of emotional response is one of 4 basic human fears that we have. Oh, that's why men don't like tears. I mean, as soon as the tears, start flowing, men don't know what to do with them. And they don't, it's an emotional response. And I'm not saying that women's tears are manipulative, but very often, we back up because, oh, no, I don't want to hurt you like that. I don't want to do this. And, what did I do? And all of a sudden we're responding because we don't want to get emotionally, we don't want to lose it. I mean, if you're going to cry enough, I might just lose it. Okay. We don't want to do that. That is one of the 4 basic fears that everybody deals with. So a terrible tyrant is going to use that fear of an emotional response to blackmail us. Now, there's another thing, and hey, I've seen leaders who have thrown an emotional tantrum. You probably have too. And when there's an emotional tantrum in a leadership meeting, everybody else backs off because, they don't want to have to respond. But there's also, a terrible time will also issue an immature, childlike threat to have a temper tantrum if they don't get their way. With a classic example for me, I was in a leadership meeting, and it was a number of elders with the senior leader, and the senior leader, wanted to move in a certain direction. They wanted something, and one of the elders stood up and, really disagreed. And I watched as he went right up to the line in his disagreement and then backed down. Why? Well, because that senior leader, you can tell when someone's really upset, and the veins are coming out on their neck, and they're gripping the table or gripping their chair, and they're sitting on the edge, and there's all tense, and it looks like they are just about ready to explode. Ever been in a situation like that with somebody? Okay, that is a terrible tyrant. There's the threat. If you cross this line, that's it. You've gone too far, and I'm going to explode, and nobody wants the senior leader to explode, right? So this is done in business all the time, too. I mean, businessmen, leaders in business, leaders in government get upset, and you can tell, oh, that's the line. Don't want to cross that, or they might really explode and get angry. They are terrible tyrants. So we're talking about fruit, okay? This is how you can tell a terrible tyrant, by the fruit, how they're functioning. And you can tell about a helpless infant. Now, there are two other types of leaders: toxic leaders, unhealthy leaders, and we can tell them by their fruit also. And I'm going to call one a benevolent dictator, which means he's a really, really nice guy as a dictator, and an abusive dictator. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that in the early years, Adolf Hitler was a benevolent dictator, but he became an abusive dictator. Both of them are wrong. So let's talk about the benevolent and the abusive dictator. Both of them are driven by the desire to be independent. Now, the helpless infant and the tyrant, are dependent. Here, the benevolent and abusive dictator, they want to be independent. They have to be in control. So they do whatever it takes to force others to let them have their way. And it's not just manipulation as in the other two. So their strategy, the benevolent dictator strategy, is this. They act like a generous parent. Now, you know what a generous parent is? Oh, it's a really nice parent that is very generous in giving the children what they want, and they're bestowing privilege and bestowing all kinds of things on their children. But when thwarted, they can easily become an abusive dictator. But the benevolent parent is a really nice person. You want your parent to be benevolent. You want them to be nice. You want them to watch out for you. See, it's more difficult to detect the selfish interest that is driving a benevolent dictator. It's kind of obvious in an abusive dictator. Now, the strategy of an abusive dictator, they're going to dump their wrath on you. And they're going to defend their abuse by saying, Philip, you made me do this. It's your fault. You made me do this. That's why I have to be abusive to you. Now, too many of us take that. I'm sorry for making you be abusive to me. We don't say it in such words, but that's really how we function, and so we apologize. An abusive dictator will hold others responsible for their failure. Well, yeah, I failed, but it's John's fault. But they will quickly grab praise for themselves at their success. So in the same activity, we succeeded. It was because of me, John. But when we failed, it was because of you, John. And again, we've probably been in those situations where, you can't win at all. All you get are the failures, but you never get credit for the wins. Somebody else always gets credit for the wins. You just get credit for the failures. Well, I would say you're dealing with a benevolent or an abusive dictator at that point. So let me talk a little bit more about benevolent dictators. Again, they want independence, so they use autonomy as a control mechanism. And they will keep other people at arm's length by a parental role. Okay? I'm the parent, so you're what? You're the children. And I'm the parent. That's my role. And I am the all-powerful parent. I know what is best. Okay? I know what's best for you. Just trust me. Well, okay, that's part of the fruit. They want to keep you at a distance. They don't like open conflict, typically. So they rely on passive aggression and avoidance and guilting techniques to get what they want. But I'm the parent, you're the child. You got that? And they increase their power by playing more and more of the good parent. So they're going to protect the children. They're going to protect the children from what they feel is going to be detrimental to them. But what they're doing is they're taking away free choice. They're taking away personal responsibility because they're assuming the responsibility. Now, I have seen this, especially in the church. We have a concept of fathering in the church, and it's a legitimate concept. But I have seen it played out in tremendous misuse where an individual, typically the senior guy, says, well, I'm the father, you're all the children, and so I'm the spiritual father. Well, there may be some truth to that, but you know what? As a father, I've got a number of kids. I want them to excel more than I am. I was talking with one of my children the other day, and he was talking about my success, but then he was talking about his success as a result of how I've raised him, and then he's talking about his son's success because of how it's kind of like they have gone. Children have excelled. Now, I am not jealous of my son. Okay, I'm proud of my son. I am not jealous of my grandson, and my son isn't jealous of his son. See, we want them to excel and do better than we do. That's just normal in a family. And yet, this misuse of the fathering concept really says, well, I'm the father, and I can't release you yet. You may have been my son for years, but I can't release you yet. It's not safe. I don't think you're ready, etc., etc. Rather than send children out to excel the father. So again, I've seen this in terms of the churches, whether it's here in Kenya or back in the U.S., benevolent dictators. And then, what are some identifying marks of a benevolent dictator? Well, they play the role to keep people from getting close. You can't get close to a parent if you're the child, right? Because you're the child, you're not supposed to get close to the parent. There are rules of how you should relate to your parent. And your parent is not an equal, and your parent is not this and not that. And so there are rules how good members should act toward their parents, even in ministry. And so great energy is typically expended trying to control situations to keep people at arm's length through those rules. Because a benevolent dictator is terrified of being out of control. And so they're using the parental role to maintain control. And as a parent, they can use some kind of bribery also. They can dispense or deny privilege. And that's one of the things about a parent. I can give you a privilege. I can take the privilege back. Depending on what? Depending on whether you do what I'm wanting you to do. So if you're going to be resistant to what I'm wanting, I'm going to deny you privilege. But if you're doing what I want, I can always give you privilege. And again, we're talking about fruit. And when you see that kind of fruit in individuals, again, whether in the church, whether in government, whether in the family, whether in business, workplace, something ought to go off going, wow, there's some fruit here that it just doesn't add up correctly. But then on the other side of the benevolent dictator, you have the abusive dictator. They also use autonomy as a control mechanism, but they do not keep people at a distance by a parental role. They do it by intimidation. I'm intimidated by that person. I don't want to even talk to them. They're unapproachable. They're unapproachable as a leader. I can't approach them. And they avoid involvement as a way of keeping others from getting close enough. So they never get involved with people. They will keep people at a distance Typically, if you're abusive, through intimidation; if you're benevolent, through a parental role. And they want to be in control while being unemotionally involved also, typically. So they also will use coercion and reward. They will coerce through withholding until they get what they want, or they will reward through dispensing when they do get what they want. And so sometimes they will withhold information, sometimes they will withhold energy or people or resources, because withholding, if I withhold, let's say from John, since I've been picking on him, if I withhold from John, I can ensure my ability to say no. Why? Because as benevolent, I either know best, or as an abusive dictator, I have the veto power over your life. I know what's better. I've withheld information. I have information you don't have. No, I'm not going to give it to you, but I'm going to veto whatever action you want to take because I'm the one in charge. And it also ensures their ability to have information no one else has. You know, in Kenya, especially, I've noticed here, and people have told me, information is what? Power. If I know something about you, I can hold that over your head, and I have power over you. If I know something nobody else knows, that gives me an edge. Well, okay, that's what abusive dictators want. The ability to have information no one else has. You know, it's interesting. Many of you have wondered, why do we give ourselves away? Why do we have people ask questions? Why do we want people to study, like ECL? Why do we want you to understand it? Why don't you just, acknowledge it and receive it? Well, because we're wanting to give all this away so you can take responsible action for your own life. Because I'm not going to be a benevolent dictator. I'm not going to be an abusive dictator. Abusive dictators. Some of the identifying marks, you'll find leaders who are angry. You don't want to cross that person because they're just angry. They will attack those around them. They will point out the failures. They will criticize. So it's continual. You did this wrong. You did this wrong. You did this wrong. I'm criticizing you all the time. And it can be cruel. It can be humorless. I'm going to project my own superiority by judging you as inferior. And if I can convince you you're inferior, that means I can say that I'm superior to you. And then we've got the last two I want to talk with you about are the competitive manipulator and the competitive intimidator. Now, both of these are driven by a need to make themselves look good. They want to look good. They're leaders, and their fruit is, I want to look good, even at the expense of other people. Now, the competitive manipulator, a little bit harder to identify, but let's look at both of them. Their strategy: the competitive manipulator competes to win. Okay? Life is a game of dogs, and you must be top dog. Okay? So I'm going to compete to win, but I'm going to take what they call a magnanimous view of winning. I'm going to be very gracious when I win. Oh, you did a great job. Not as good as mine, but I win, you lose. But hang in there, John. One of these days, you'll be able to do it as good as I will. Okay? And so I'm going to be a very magnanimous winner, but I am going to win. Now, the competitive intimidator likes to win, but they're going to humiliate at the same time their competition. I'm going to win, and not only are you going to lose, but I'm going to destroy you in the process. I'm going to take you apart. Winning is not enough. You must be humiliated and you must be destroyed because as a competitor, you are my enemy. So I'm going to win, you're going to lose, and you're going to really lose. I mean, you're going to lose everything. So when we talk about competitive manipulators, we go back there. They're very friendly, and they will challenge and they will charm you to get what they want from you, but they're driven by a need to win but be liked. I'm going to win, but I want you to like me in the process of you losing. In fact, I want your admiration for me as a winner, even though you're a loser. I beat you, but I want you to look up to me and admire me for how I have put you in your place. I will defeat you, but I will show you the model of winning behavior. I'm the essence of good sportsmanship, okay? And I will beat you, but I will be very gracious about beating you. Now, when a competitive manipulator loses, they often will accept responsibility for the loss. But subtly, it's somebody else's fault. And they may even be so noble as to accept the undeserved blame. Okay, I'll take the blame, but it was really my team that screwed up. Okay? But I know I'm the head of the team, so it's ultimately my fault, but it's really their fault. And so they thereby elevate themselves to a heroic model of sportsmanship in life because I will accept this. And they often, again, use humor and flattery and good looks and appearance. Sometimes they even set up others to look bad. Sometimes, it would be like if I know that John is already, he is already overloaded, he is already behind schedule on what he's doing, but I want to give him additional responsibilities, and I give it to him in a group so that if he says no, I can say, John, are you less committed than everybody else? And I can manipulate. And again, many of us have been manipulated like that. So sometimes they disarm with friendliness in order to get information that they can later use against you. And again, they'll often use status symbols to promote themselves. They'll use physical status symbols often. And they appeal to a person's sense of pride and flatter outrageously to get what they want. Now, what about the competitive intimidators? Well, their control system, they want to scare people into compliance. Okay? They're going to intimidate you sometimes with intellectual reasoning. They're going to use humor to insult and embarrass you. So they're going to say something to insult and embarrass you and then go, oh, I was just kidding. Right? Yeah, were they? They find an area of weakness or lack of knowledge in someone, and then they tear that person apart. Because, again, it's not just about winning. It's about winning and destroying the other person. And often, you can kind of, part of the fruit is in your conversation, they're going to say, oh, yes, and I know so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And they imply that the personal relationship with this person gives them an implied status. And again, if they can get you to really be indebted to them, they will use that to later get information from you that they can use. So they have to put down others to maximize their own feelings of power, and others are competitors that need to be beaten, controlled, and life is about winning and losing, and they have to be top dog. Now that's some fruit. Okay, as you look at false prophets, as you look at leaders around you, and you begin to understand some of the fruit, and you go, oh my gosh, this person in government is a terrible tyrant, or this person in business, my boss, is an abusive dictator, or look at the fruit that is being encountered. You see, we encounter leaders, like I said, in every area of our life: government, family, workplace, church. If we examine their lives, what fruit would we discover? If we were to examine our own life, what fruit would we discover? If somebody sitting next to you were to examine your life, what fruit would they discover? Some people pretend to be and appear to be something they're not. But it's not a matter of what we say, it's a matter of how we live. And so let me ask you this. Jesus said to beware of false prophets. If we examine the lives of leaders around us, what fruit will we discover? If we examined our own life, or if somebody close to us examined our life, would they discover a pretense of helplessness, financial helplessness, physical helplessness, emotional helplessness, helplessness that then they use for manipulation through guilt to take care of them? Would they find us acting in such a way so that others will take care of us or take care of them? Will we make others feel guilty? Do they make others feel guilty for not taking care of them? If we examine the lives of leaders that we know, that we read about, what fruit would we discover? What fruit would we discover in our life? Are there patterns of intimidation through threats of emotional tantrums? Do we throw emotional tantrums? Do we use the threat of that to get people to do what we want? Is there a drivenness in us to be independent? Do we play the role of a good parent and we think that we know what others need and so we steal their responsibility in life? Are we afraid of being out of control? Do these leaders dispense or deny privileges? Again, we can ask, what are we seeing in others? What are people seeing in us? What do we see in ourselves? Is there a pattern of keeping others at an arm's length through intimidation? Is that how we do it? We have a need for information that nobody else has. We have a need to be in the driver's seat and to have the veto power. We use anger to intimidate other people. Is there drivenness to make ourselves look good? Is there drivenness in the life of those who around us who are leaders to make themselves look good? Is there the drivenness and the need to win? Maybe graciously, maybe also destroying the opposition. Do we use status symbols? Are those leaders around us employing status symbols to try to exalt themselves? Is there a need to win but to destroy the competition? Jesus said, beware of false prophets, false leaders who look good on the outside. Okay, all these leaders look good on the outside. But inside, they are ravenous wolves. They're hypocrites, they're ravenous wolves. He said, you will know them by their fruit. We are to be fruit inspectors. What is the fruit in our life? What is the fruit in these leaders' lives? Where do we need to change? Perhaps, who do we not need to follow? Let's pray. Father, I thank you that your Son gave us a warning to beware of the false. And we become aware of the false as we are so close to the true and the genuine. And when we examine the leadership of your Son, we examine his traits, his character, how he dealt with people. When we truly are close to him, and he is allowed to live his life through us, what we model are those characteristics of Christ. The false prophets are so close, in some respects, to the real. It's hard to tell a counterfeit. But you said we will know them if we will examine the fruit of their lives. Father, I pray that your Holy Spirit would alert us to any fruit that is in our life that is contrary to that of Jesus. Any of the things mentioned in any of these leadership stereotypes. And Father, I pray that you would alert us, that we might then really change and allow you to live your life through us. And Father, I pray that you would grant us wisdom. We walk in a world that is full of false prophets. We walk in a world that is full of ravenous wolves. And we need to walk circumspectly. We need to weigh the fruit, not just what someone says in their gracious words and their outward demeanor and their clothes and their riches and all that they may have, but what is the fruit like as we look at their lives, as we look at what's left in their wake as they pass by? What is the fruit like as we experience them in our life? Father, where there have been false prophets in our lives in the past, I pray that where you brought that up, that there just be a forgiveness right now, a forgiveness on the part of your people toward that false prophet, a forgiveness and a release, and a healing, Father, of the hurt that had been inflicted. So, Father, in Jesus' name, we ask that you come, you reveal through your Spirit, you live through us through your Spirit, you heal through your Spirit by your touch. And Father, we would walk as innocent as doves, as wise as serpents, and we would test the fruit. In Jesus' name, amen.